I apologize. I do have a cold today. So, um, like probably everybody else, how many people have a cold? 1, 2, 3. If you don't have it, you just got over it. If you're not getting over it, you probably are fighting it. So it's the lot of a teacher. Um, so um, today we have a pretty simple schedule. Um, we will start with our second video. Excuse me, Natalie, not Danielle. I think you were the first, and today is Natalie's video, and she's the person who can't come to class. She's been watching us online, so she knows all of you, but you don't know her very well. So, so she sent her video, and I'm going to try to pull it up and do the best I can to represent her. And I just wanted to look for one more thing. Make sure I had everything. All right, I'm going to look in one more place. All right. Okay, and so she gave us a pretty different thing, actually. It's not a running record. She's given us 10 minutes of her tutoring. Brave person. Right off with, a group that she doesn't get to interact with. Super brave. So what we are going to be doing is continuing with our task of looking for meaning, structure, and visual. So we're going to watch the 10 minutes of the students in action and look for meaning, structure, and visual. Now that doesn't mean that, and I don't have any text of the student that the student's reading or writing. So do what you can, and but as you're doing that, also look and see if the student, write down if the teacher's kind of asking for a particular cue. Like if she says, look for the pictures, kind of, put that meaning note in and things, so that we know that it was that she coached, because this is tutoring. You're allowed to coach. And let's see if the student is able to do the cues when she's coached. So that'll be an extra piece that we get to add into our conversation. Very exciting. So, and are there any questions about that? Just kind of take notes. I do kind of a running record kind of thing, and then when the teacher adds something, I just kind of make a note of it. That's how I often observe classes or anything else that I want to put in. I don't have to limit myself to the running record, but I can kind of keep track of what's going. And then afterwards, after we watch the video, I'll give you some time to go through and analyze for meaning, structure, and visual, so that you have the time to sit back and do that a little bit, and then we'll come in and we'll have the conversation. I don't have much information on the age level of the student, but the student is certainly kind of a, it looks like early elementary level. So I'll share my screen and we can get to it. All right, where did I put it? That's not it? Oh, here it is, right over here. Let me make sure my sound is up. because if my sound's not up, your sound won't be. All right.
So, our story, what is our title for our story today? Not too cold today. Very good. Have you ever seen a polar bear before? Where? At the zoo. What do you notice about polar bears at the zoo? Are they big, small? They're pretty big, yeah. Have you ever seen a polar bear in real life? Besides the zoo? Probably not, right? Do you know where polar bears are from? I'm not sure where they are either, so that's why we're in the place. So what we're going to do first, we're going to do a picture walk. A picture walk is where we're just going to look through and see if we learn anything just from the pictures. Not reading anything, just looking at the pictures. So let's do a picture walk. Okay, so what is this picture of? A map. So what would a map show us? Do you think? Don't worry, there's never a wrong answer here. What do you think that map shows us? Sometimes we could read a key. Do you know what a key is on a map? A key is where it describes the map and shows you what's on it. So what does this say? So what do you think this map shows us? Nice, very good. Okay, let's keep going. Ooh, what else do we have here? Picture of a polar bear. What do you think that's trying to tell us? Maybe they're in the ocean. Maybe they're in a river. Oh no, we'll find out. Okay, now what do you think this is? That's an interesting picture. What do you think that is of? Their fur. Why do you think that? Because it says fur. Nice job. Okay, I think we got one more. Okay, what about that one? Yeah, let's see. How do you think it cools down? Just by looking at that picture. Okay, so in the back of every book, usually, there's something called a glossary or an index. Have you ever heard one of those before? Yeah, so we're going to learn about 5 big words. Can you read what they are? Yeah. Wow. Ooh, okay, so just looking at the pictures and reading some of our glossary, our keywords, what do you think this is going to be about? How the weather is for the polar bears? Very good. So you ready to read? Let's do this. Okay. Do you ever wonder how animals stay warm in cold environments? They can't wrap themselves up in a blanket or tame after heat. They can't run out in sweaters and scarves. They can't make soup or hot chocolate, but animals have their own ways of keeping warm, adapting to danger. When it comes to surviving extreme cold, it's no animal is better adapted than the polar bear. The polar bear is the largest of the 8 species or kinds of bears. Polar bears live only in very cold climates. The Arctic region. There are some research to tell you that the polar bear's environment is icy cold in the winter. Temperatures can drop to minus 50 degrees, as that's not enough reason to shiver. Polar bears also spend a great deal of time in the icy Arctic Ocean. are usually found in the ocean. Coral reefs are often found in or near the ocean too. They are excellent swimmers. Surviving the cold. How do polar bears survive all that cold? Polar bears are very well adapted to life and frozen Arctic. A polar bear's entire body, even the bottom of its feet, is covered in fur. The fur protects it from the cold. The top layer of the fur is called guard hair. Red hair sticks together when it sweats. The wet hair is a barrier that protects polar bears from the cold water. Below the gut is its down undercoat of fur that gives polar bears another layer of warmth. Underneath the fur, polar bears have black skin. The black color helps them absorb heat. From their skin underneath their skin, they have a layer of leather. The leather both protects them from the cold and
I'm going to pause it. Is everybody having trouble hearing? Everyone. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Oops. All right. Let me. All right, get out of
helps
this.
them float in the water.
All right. What we're going to do is I'm putting this link in your chat, and you guys watch it and come back in 10.
Hi, Tana. Sorry I was late. Is there something specific? Are we just watching her doing the I can't hear you.
This is our video for the day. You know, this is Natalie's video, and she usually watches us after. So she, you might not recognize her, but she's one of our classmates, and she was very brave and did a lesson. So she, so it looks a little different, but just look through it for meaning, structure, and visual. Just like always, I don't have the text, so you might have to kind of intuit some of it, and maybe even intuit it from some of the talk after, you know, to find out what she did and didn't do. And I've been listening also to see if her guesses make sense and sound right, just without the text, because I can make those judgments, you know, to see if she's monitoring for that. So anyway, so do you have the link? Good. See you in 10. All right, why don't we get started? It looks like everybody's back. So I think actually she was doing her assessment project still, but you know, she's got a little a different kind of assessment. It possibly could be the LLI. I can't remember. The questions I should have asked her. So what did you notice? Oh, I'm going to give you a couple minutes just to look for meaning, structure, and visual. Sorry, forgot I was going to do that. All right, so take a minute or so. All righty. So what did you notice about our student? Well, I should say our student, how about her student? Let's talk about, it's MSV, so let's start with them. What did you notice about her use of meaning? What was she able to do? Lydia?
I think overall she had some knowledge on like the topic. So I think in general, she used that kind of to help her out. Like the background knowledge on polar bears was enough that she could kind of use that meaning throughout the story. You know, even if she wasn't sure exactly, like she kind of had to sound out extreme. She still used kind of her background knowledge. I would bet she probably maybe knows what extreme is, and kind of, I would say overall definitely used her background knowledge to help throughout the whole reading.
Absolutely. Alyssa?
Oh God, I have a cold. Okay. All right, here we go. I said the same thing, that those words like blubber and Arctic, it seemed like she almost stumbled over just pronouncing Arctic a couple times. I know, but I mean, she read it right, but I know in the beginning when she asked her, where do you think polar bears live? And she didn't know. So maybe she wasn't as familiar with the Arctic, and that's why that word didn't come to her so quickly. But overall, those words like blubber, I can't think of what else, but it seemed like she had knowledge of those words when she was reading them.
So during the reading as well. So she had some knowledge before reading, some background knowledge about polar bears, but maybe didn't have the word Arctic, and was able to kind of adapt, or blubber, able to kind of pull it together, you know, attach them to this during the reading. So she was not only having knowledge, but using it to understand what she was reading during the read. And sometimes that doesn't happen, you know. Sometimes at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, the student still has the same background knowledge and hasn't really gained anything from the reading at all. But in this case, she seemed to be using her background knowledge to help her understand, you know, during the reading. Yeah,
Do you think that that was a sign of like her level of ability to be able to read the book as far as her level of fluency, that she was able to like use her background knowledge as she was decoding and reading the book, because it wasn't like, I don't know if it was instructional or at instructional level, or it was, so it seemed like she easily was able to use her background knowledge because she was kind of fluent.
And you're really giving attention to kind of the speed and maybe, you know, how she was reading the words, kind of fluency and speed and accuracy seemed pretty good. And I think you're getting at that attention economy, that idea that she wasn't fussing so much over sounding out and reading the words, so she could use that time to focus on using her background knowledge to read the story and get the meaning. Was that a really long translation of what you just said? Thank you. Yeah, that sounds like it. It sounds like it. And you were kind of getting to that. I wrote that down too. That her fluency was good, like talk. Or at least I should say her expression was good, like talk. And that can help with meaning as well. Not always. There's always those kids that are really good at reading it and make us think that they understand everything. But, and then you get to the end and they're like, I have no idea what I just read, but I read it in a beautiful way. But she seems to be doing that because we heard we have some evidence here. So we've got those concept questions, and then we have her kind of picking things up. And then we also have the ending questions as well. Well, what about the end? How did she do on those ending questions? Danielle?
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. I kind of wondered if for one of the questions when she said to name 2 things that she learned, what was on the cover of the book, because it almost looked like she looked down at the cover and then thought of it. So I didn't know if maybe the polar bear was laying down on the cover or something like that to stay warm, which I don't know, maybe she did learn part of that, but the cover at least maybe jogged her memory. I don't know.
That's a good point. I didn't even notice that she was already attending to that picture even before the picture walk. Really focusing on that. So using the picture is one of her strategies, as well as, using her background knowledge, and making sure to use all that. Those are really good strategies.
Oh, I forget her name, Ashley. I like how she helped her to like deduce the information, and by questioning her when she was asking about what's the opposite of a polar bear, and she kind of guided her through figuring it out. So she kind of was teaching her how to think about the book without giving her the answers. So I liked how she tutored her through that. And I thought that was a skill that the young lady could still use.
And I like that too. She used kind of a funneling question format, which I think is really powerful, where you start really broad and then you kind of question a little bit more in, and that the student can't do that. You make it a little more specific until you get where the student can be successful, but you don't hand her the answer, which is nice. Very nice. Well, and that is true, though. She was pretty good at getting kind of the recall questions, but she really had trouble with ones where she had to kind of go beyond the text and compare it to an animal that wasn't in the text, and try to. Yes, Lydia.
Well, and I was just noting she was writing when the girl said like can't and it's, she was writing as the teacher. So I was wondering if it said cannot and it is, and the student was like combining. I don't know, but since she was writing, that was kind of my assumption that she was combining words.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if she was. And if that's the case, that goes right with that fluency piece, where she's kind of just translating it into something she knows, something comfortable. Interesting. And that may not even be an error in that case. So Natalie, if you're watching this, let us know. I like how she said giraffes were in the jungle. Kid knowledge is so cool. Their understanding of the world. Oh, I thought I heard somebody coming on. Yeah, it did sound, she did have trouble. And it could be because she was so quiet. Maybe she's very shy, and maybe having the video was hard to kind of think in a complicated way. But that more kind of taking the information beyond, she did have trouble with that. Like I said, maybe it was because her situation and context, but that would be something to look at. Critical thinking in terms of reading and the text be useful. Alrighty, thank you, Natalie. You're off the hook. Way to go. And with that, we can go on to our presentations. So let's see, where did we put just dawned on me. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to let you guys just get onto me here. Who would like to go first? I got to get back to see you. Sarah, go ahead.
I volunteer as tribute. Get it over with. So, let's see. I need to share my screen somehow. How do I do that?
All right, you go. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I see it. We're good.
Excellent. And what are you presenting?
Oh, sight words.
Sight words. Excellent.
I think I need to share like the whole thing, right? Just share. There we go.
Actually, yeah, if you're going to do it won't follow the pop-up if you, it's annoying. If you, present, do the slideshow.
Yeah, right. I said, pretty sure. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Sight words?
Yeah.
Pretty blue. Okay. All right. Also known as high frequency words and reading word lists. Okay, so some fun background information. The Fry sight words and the Dolce sight words, both the guys' names are Edward. Had no idea. Okay. Fry sight words were created later. They were created by Edward Fry in 1957, revised in 1980, and they have over 1,000 words, including all parts of speech, and they're organized by frequency, and you typically see these in grades like 3 through 9. However, my school definitely uses them for all grade levels. The Dolce sight words were created earlier in 1936. There are only 220 words, not including any nouns. and they tend to be more common in younger grades. These are the most common word lists that I'm pretty sure all of us have seen floating around in our schools and our classrooms. However, I know that there are other like curriculum word lists that are given for sight words. Whatever the tutoring, whoever is the woman who tutors, what's your name? I can't say the name of it. Elizabeth Watson, your tutoring people, they have a word list thing. Was reading information on that too. But these ones tend to be the most common that you will see. I don't know how I can move. There we go. There are traditional uses of sight words. You tend to hear them as like snap words. People refer to them as words to be read in an instant, that these words cannot and should not be decoded. That's from Rethinking Sight Words, an article that I read. They're commonly used for assessment. You see a lot of them with flashcards, a lot of them from like rote memorization. So this is how you tend to see sight words used. However, after doing a bunch of research, it's not necessarily the best way to be doing sight words. And the misconception is that these words cannot and should not be decoded is usually said everywhere. I mean, I caught myself saying it at conferences, like, review these flashcards, these are our tricky words, but really, they can be decoded if you just go more in depth into the English language with the kids. If you teach them spelling patterns and all of the tricks of the English language, then yeah, they can be decoded. They just are trickier to do. They don't follow the basic rule of thumb, generic like phoneme sound that they're taught in kindergarten or first grade. They tend to switch things up, but they can be decoded if you teach them how to decode it properly. So I included in here a video. I embedded it. I'm not a tech guru, so I'm hoping it works, of a way that you traditionally see sight words used. We don't need to watch it all. Here's to hoping. So she's like impossible to hear. Okay, so show of hands, who's done sight words that way? Myself included, totally, all the time, definitely have done it. All right, so commonly used for assessment. They're a pretty easy way to get an idea of what phonemes kids are struggling with. They set their general, at their general level. You can get a decent amount of information using them as an assessment. They are a pretty valid tool. They're pretty easy to do. They don't take up a lot of time, and you can get a lot of valuable information off of it to see if they're struggling in like digraphs or diphthongs or where they're struggling with what sounds. Okay, let's see if I can get it to go to the next slide. No, I don't want it to do that. Stop. Thanks. There we go. So now, if we rethink how to use sight words using a more multi-sensory approach with learning sight words, will get them to better understand the concepts of the English language in general. So I took a quote from a couple of my articles. This is from the Methods for Sight Word Recognition in Kindergarten, Traditional Flashcard Method versus Multi-Sensory Approach. It appears that anytime the abstract is taken to concrete visual representation, that participants' achievement, understanding, and learning, recall, and recognition of the sight words is increased. It also says here, unfortunately, you're kind of in my way, rather than the classic drill and kill familiar to most adults from their own childhood. They're I can't read it because you guys are all in the way. Hold on, sorry. There needs to be motivating activities for the reading students that include games and activities from current slide. Thank you. So examples of this is doing like a handling method, a morphing method, including games and activities. Instead of going into route explaining what all of those are, I included another fun video of a woman who I thought taught sight words pretty well. It is way too long, would take up our whole class. We're gonna watch about like maybe 3 to 5 minutes of it because she does a really good job introducing her sight words using a multi-sensory approach. Okay.
Do you hear the I sound? Correct, 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 correct. Darius, do you hear the I sound in cat? No, if we tap it out, cat. Repeat, cat. There's no I sound. I have some sound riddles. I'm going to show you a picture. And I want you to tell me what word could this be with the I sound. For example, it's not cube because that doesn't have the I sound. What might this be? I'll give you 5 seconds to think. Jacob knows, Carolyn knows, Delilah knows. Delilah? Ice. Repeat. Ice. 5 seconds to think. What could this word be? It's not a lemon. It's something with the I sound. It looks kind of like a lemon, but it's green. Carolyn knows. Egypt knows. Whisper your guess. Jayla? Lime. Repeat. Lime. Ooh, I think we all know this one. What has the I sound? Say it if you know it. Lime. Sometimes it's in the beginning of a word. Say ice. Ice. Idea. Idea. Islands. Islands. Sometimes the I sound is at the end or in the middle of the word. Say try. Try. Fly. Fly. High. High. Nice. I'm going to show you now how you spell this sound. There's an I. We leave a space for another sound, and then magic E. We're also going to add it to our chart. Does anyone know what word is our example that has the I sound? What's our picture that's going to help us remember what sound these letters make? Dasani? Say I. Like bike. Like bike. Cool. You'll also be seeing me do this a lot with my fingers because this I only says I when it's working as a team with magic E. Magic E makes I say its own name. So if we spell I like this with space for a sound in the middle and maybe a sound in the beginning, how would we spell bike? I'm going to just bring down the magic I, magic E and the I. How would we spell bike? Track. Ooh, I'll choose from the cup to be fair because everyone knows. Jacob?
All right, so you guys get an idea. I could watch her for days. Okay, so she really breaks down the different phoneme sounds, and you can do this with every sound in the language, all the tricks, all the EA sounds. One part that I missed because for some reason it started at 2 minutes and 40 seconds and I didn't realize I made it do that, is she has them recognize what their mouth does for different sounds. Like, is their mouth smiling when it says I? That means they know that they're saying the I sound if their mouth is smiling. So there's all different ways to get them to hear the sounds that they're saying instead of just like rote memorization. Okay, so that brings me to my next slide, which I think I might need to X out of again somehow. There we go. Okay, so the strengths of using sight words is it does increase fluency. I mean, if you do them repetitively, it will increase their fluency and promotes their automaticity of their words. And it is appealing for its assessment nature and kind of data driven. It is a useful tool for identifying where they're struggling with certain sounds. However, it typically becomes an act of memorization, and it doesn't always address the phoneme grapheme relationship. It just has them memorize a word. Like it just has them see that, okay, this says the because it says the, and it doesn't get them to understand that the TH is making the sound and the S is making the S sound because the T isn't making it like loud T sound. So it doesn't get them to quite understand the phoneme grapheme relationship, and it does not always relate to discipline specific literacies. So a lot of the times there's a struggle with getting them to understand why they have to be learning the fry words if they're learning about butterflies and science and other things in social studies. So sometimes they aren't necessarily content or discipline specific, which can be difficult at times. But that's all I got. I don't know how oh, stop sharing. There we go.
Thanks. Are there any questions for Sarah? Nice videos.
Thanks. I thought it would be easier to show rather than explain.
There are tons of games and things to get those patterns that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And everything. There's a lot of opportunities now. Oh, and I've noticed so often what comes out of an IEP meeting is the students need to do flashcards. And, you know, what a great option, you know?
But it was interesting because I was reading, like all the research I've read says that it's such a misconception that these words are not decodable. So then I just decided, you know, I'm just gonna take a gander at my kids' flashcards that I made. And sure enough, like the first one on there's between. Like you can absolutely decode between.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I will say, you know, getting automatic in them, I mean, decoding is one piece, but getting so that you don't have to decode is part of what takes the attention off. So I think a lot of it has to do with them being words that occur so frequently that it'll be useful not to have to do that.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to watch my son recently do a list of these, and it impresses me so much how little guys can know the difference between through and tough. You know, it just kills me. All right. Thank you. Who would like to go next? Ash, go ahead. Take it away.
All right. If I mess this up, I'm sorry. All right. Is it working?
Sure is.
Okay, cool. All right. So I had performance evaluations, student performance evaluations. So student performance evaluations, or just simply known as student performance assessments, are tests that show a student's higher order thinking skills or examine a student's higher order thinking skills. And these skills include, but are not limited to, critical thinking, analysis, logical reasoning, all that good stuff. Performance assessments are becoming more common now that No Child Left Behind has been replaced with Every Student Succeeds Act, which focuses more on measuring quote unquote 21st century skills, which are these higher order thinking skills. So slowly but surely, in theory, the state tests that do multiple choice and whatnot should slowly be pushed away and make room for performance evaluations. Here are some examples of performance evaluations or performance assessments. So this is one of them. The one on the left is a third grade class, and it basically has students doing Common Core standards in both math and literacy, and it tackles critical thinking, communication, and digital literacy, as we see here, and it has them doing more of like a project-based assessment. And the one on the right can be done 6th through 8th grade in English, and it's basically like a narrative writing, but again, it hits critical thinking, communication, and in this one, cultural competency, and it has them create a product rather than just do like some sort of multiple choice test to see if they have these skills. And then below is what the end result should look like. All right, so how are performance evaluations used? First, a teacher must pinpoint the skills that they want to assess. So if you want to test the students on their critical thinking or their analysis, you have to make that decision before you make the performance evaluation. Then once you choose the skills that you want to test, you have to choose an activity that will actually measure those skills. And finally, once the activity and the skills have been chosen, you can create a criterion, which is basically a rubric that will help you grade the performance assessment. After all this is completed, then you can administer the evaluation. Are they effective? So the good. Several scholars believe that performance evaluations are a positive assessment tool when you compare them with traditional multiple choice exams that we currently take now at the state level. The research they cite states that using performance evaluations helps teach multiple skills at once, and it helps test multiple skills at once and increases the amount of data that you can track as a teacher. Some research also states that because the assignments and the assessments are like project based or whatever you want to call it, students are more motivated to actually do the assignment. They feel like it's worth it, especially if you center it around like real life stuff. Like in that one example, the math teacher had them create a floor plan for doing something with the cafeteria. They can relate to that because they go to the cafeteria like every day, that kind of stuff. The bad. Other scholars do not find them effective, but for reasons outside of the control of the actual performance evaluation. The research that they cite shows that creating these assessments is time consuming. It's hard to put together. And in the educational climate that many schools are in right now in several districts, they don't give their staff enough planning time in general. So it's going to be very hard to put this together. And besides a lack of planning time, the other negative thing researchers found is that teachers are not properly trained to administer these assessments, and they're not properly trained on how to grade them because the grading is subjective, because you have to grade critical thinking and analysis, which is subjective rather than grading like a multiple choice test, which there's always like a right answer. Strengths. They give you a lot of data, they measure higher order thinking skills, and they provide project-based learning opportunities that increase motivation. Weaknesses, time consuming to create, time consuming to grade, grading is subjective, and that can skew the data, and training for staff is limited. Any questions? All right, awesome.
It's nice to know we're going that direction. Have you guys ever gone out or tried it?
Actually, I have to do it now for the IB school that I'm at. So it is very time consuming, and I don't know like if when I grade it, I don't know if I'm doing like the right thing when I'm like, yeah, this kid can critically think. I don't know. But we'll see. It's like a test.
Go ahead, Tamika.
Not necessarily performance assessment, but I worked at a Montessori school, and I just saw how excited and motivated and immersed in what the children were learning when they were actually doing projects that were either centered around something locally or even something nationally. They would go on a yearly, I forget, like a mock UNN meeting in New York, and they would, over the course of the year, develop a whole assessment. Part of it went for the teachers, but I'm sure they had a rubric, but it was really complex, like he said, and very time consuming.
Anybody else? I know Australia went to performance-based assessments. They took out all of their other assessments. And they actually, I think they went to, well, anyway, they did a whole bunch of things all at once. They had a very forward-thinking head of their Department of Education. And so I don't remember a lot of specifics, but one I do remember is in 4th grade, kind of the yearly project was urban planning, and that they would, through that, they would get all their assessments. The rubrics were actually created for them already. The plan was kind of created for them, though there was places for the teachers, of course, to kind of move and change, and with the students that they have, to alter things and to support different interests or needs and things through there. But the rubrics came to them, and so it was kind of a year-long, and I could be wrong about the year-long thing. It could be just a piece of their year, but if our national tests do go that way, and we do get support, it might not be as daunting for individual teachers as it is now. If there's that kind of agreement, because right now I think teachers are kind of on their own to create the projects and then do the performance assessment, and that is a lot. All right, kind of a peek into the coming years, perhaps. That would change education significantly if that's where we go, because assessment dominates so much of education, schooling. All righty. Who would like to go next? Thank you, Ash. Lydia, go ahead.
All right, I'm gonna need a student at the beginning. So who would like to be my lovely student? I would highly appreciate it. Who wants to be my student? Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so here we go. And you will get to see my lovely presentation. All right. Let's present. All right, so I have retelling. You can see my screen, yes? Okay. So generally speaking, I'm sure you've heard of retelling. So it is basically used to check student understanding. You kind of check their attention and what they have been acquiring. Teachers ask generalized questions such as, what happened next? Can you say more? Did anything else happen? If the kid is kind of feeling a little bit stumped. They usually tell it like in order, but sometimes kids kind of bounce around depending on, I guess, how they remember it. It's kind of a system of memorization, and then you say it back, and then you kind of, that's generally what happens. It's meant to test what students comprehend and understand. They're going to use their typical reading behaviors. They're going to reread, sound out words, skip words, whatever is kind of typical for them. So now is when my lovely student, Sarah, is going to read to herself this lovely segment. You could do this orally, you could do this out loud, it kind of depends. So Sarah is going to read it to herself, and then she is going to retell us afterwards, okay? So everybody read it, and then we'll kind of see, do we all have the same understanding afterwards? Oops, my bad, sorry. My bad. 1 second. There we go. Okay, go ahead. You good? Okay, so then I would basically say, so Sarah, tell me what you remember from this story.
And then I would respond that there was a boy named Jerry, and he really wanted to fly, and he was convinced that he was going to fly someday, and not like go fly in an airplane, that he was going to fly like a hawk, because he thought hawks were awesome and like beautiful. And then he jumped off the top of a cliff and began to fly, but then he woke up in a hospital bed and realized it was all a dream, and he had his tonsils taken out, and he was just waking up from his tonsil operation. But then he looked down, he was holding a hawk feather. So was it really a dream, or was it not? We're left wondering.
And this lovely 5th grade student was doing a great job. I could ask some follow-up questions, but she pretty much went in order. So mostly it was sequential that I didn't have too many follow-up questions. So thank you very much to my lovely students. All right, slightly complicated part about retelling is there's numerous scales. There is Marrow's 2001 scale, which is kind of judging on settings, characters, plot elements, and inferences and connections, and the teacher gives a 0 to 2 scale. There's a retelling taxonomy, which has matching and substitution and addition and summary and conflict and rearrangement and omission. And there's also like Irwin's and Mitchell's 1983, which is text structure, main ideas, relevant details, summarizing and generalizing beyond the text. Also, this reading that I took, I got from the BRI, and that literally is just, you get all of it, some of it, or none of it. So it's kind of, there's a lot of judgment, and it's still kind of up to the teacher where it's slightly subjective. So a guided retelling is kind of like a specific type of retelling. This is to encourage interdisciplinary literacy. Any teacher could theoretically be working on this. It's kind of a main emphasis on the story elements. This can be done with different texts. So you can choose a more challenging one and easier one depending on kind of the content area and what you're going for. They identify the academic language, they identify their thinking habits, and then you kind of use those visual cues, visual representations to kind of help recall that from the reading. During this, they're using academic language, thinking habits, visual cues, and kind of everything similar, but it's generally like this could be used in a science classroom. This could be used in an art classroom. And that's a cool thing, is that you could use it across content areas. Applications. So these the retelling results can be applied immediately. The teacher could then go, oh, we didn't get this, let's go focus on this. It could be related to what you're learning in class. If it's a science classroom, maybe it's about your nucleus or whatever it is that you're learning about. It kind of leads to comprehension and understanding. Okay, they are very fluent like the student we saw earlier, but they're not comprehending all of it. So then I need to work more on comprehension, or depending on what the student is struggling with. Definitely just gives the teacher next steps of action. Are they following story structure? Are they all over the place? If they're jumping all over, maybe I need to teach a little bit more about story structure. They are using some memorization, so that is a skill that some kids have, some kids slightly need to work on. So that is something to be aware of. There is lots of research around this. I was honestly amazed at how much research there was. It basically, generally research says it fits into any instructional routine. It can be used across classrooms, which is really cool. Students are applying and developing their knowledge. They're using their text features. They're working on speaking too, which is a really awesome skill. Students have a basic understanding of the story structure and background knowledge. So students are a lot of times relying on the author's words and kind of almost repeating what that author had already said. Outcomes. It's generally speaking, story retelling is associated with how well they're going to read, how much they're comprehending, and things like that. There's a long history to measure that like correlates with comprehension, as well as there was some research even saying that it would kind of help the speech of it, you know, the influence on language learning and how they could rearrange the information in their mind, as well as kind of retell it to others. It's supposed to help fluency because you're verbalizing it. You know, you're not just saying what you think, but you're using the author's words and practicing that fluency. retelling is a start, so you could work then on summarizing, you could work on paraphrasing, also the deeper comprehension, which is kind of the overall, ideally, that's kind of one of our goals. Also, it's working on text type and background knowledge, which contributes to these scores. So depending on how much they have on background knowledge could affect sort of the score. And I'm sorry, there's so many words. I know I broke the unwritten PowerPoint rules. More kind of on some outcome, or sorry, these are the strengths. I don't know where my title went. There we go. Some of the strengths are that you're practicing your oral language. It's good. Kids should always be speaking. Even at a young age, old age, it's getting them ready to kind of use those public speaking skills. It fits into any classroom. The fact that it's interdisciplinary is highly useful. And you're getting to know each kid. You're learning them as a reader, as an individual. Even in a science, a social studies, a math room, you'd still want to know, how do you learn, etc. What is your comprehension skills? In an intervention sense, it's getting to know their specific struggles. So are you struggling with the fluency? Are you struggling with the comprehension? Are you struggling with that kind of skill of memorization? That it gives you a very specific, there's lots and lots of data. So therefore, you're kind of then figuring out what's the next step. And it gives you lots of possible next steps with the student. Last but not least, weaknesses. Some weaknesses is it highly relates to background knowledge. Since students are usually using that story structure, if you don't know story structure, you are going to struggle. Sarah did a beautiful job of going in order. Well, a second grader might not have nearly as much knowledge as this fifth grader, that would be kind of difficult. It's slightly subjective. So like if I'm judging that it's more important that he had the feather and she didn't mention the feather, there could be that miscommunication between the teacher and the student and what both of them are valuing, because it is slightly subjective. The student may forget what they're reading, so that could also be a struggle. If they don't have as much memorization skills, that would be harder for them. A lot of them are not culturally relevant. Like I got that one from the BRI, in which case it's very difficult to make it apply to all. The scales are also complicated. Whose scale is right? That might depend on your district, that might depend on the assessment, and that's kind of just a downfall because there's so many. Last but not least, it's time consuming. You have to sit there and read it with them, ask them to retell it, those follow-up questions, anything else, that it does definitely take time. So that's just another thing to be aware of. There's my works cited. And any questions at all? How do I get back to Zoom?
You might want to get out of the share.
I'm trying. Oh, not new share.
Up at the top. There's a
Pause
little.
share. Stop share. There we go.
There you go. All right. Retelling. You know what? I never thought about the language implications. I think that's a wonderful point. I do have a question, but it doesn't have to do with retelling. Why do you have caution tape on the back door?
It's Halloween-ish. My husband decorated. Sorry if it scares you. This is my sunroom, so it's just a door.
That's awesome. Okay, I just
Halloween time, I'm really into it.
That's wonderful. Anybody? Thank you, Lydia. All right. Why don't we take 7 and or 5 to 7, and we'll be back right around 25 after the hour. All right. Let's close this door. All right. Who would like to go next? Go ahead, Hannah. And then Alyssa.
Okay, so I will try to share my screen. Okay, so I think I'm sharing my screen now. Okay, so the assessment tool that I had was spelling assessments. And we'll start with just spelling's connection to reading development. Research stated that spelling and reading rely on the same underlying knowledge, such as the relationships to spelling and sounds, and spelling and reading build and rely on the same mental representations of words. So if you're able to quickly picture a word or kind of know its spelling makeup, it makes it more accessible for fluent reading. And while we're on this slide, I'll kind of just talk about or mention, I think a lot of schools are shifting away from a standardized spelling. I know previously, and even in my schooling, spelling came from a basal reader. It was very standardized. You're focusing on word memorization, but now the shift has really turned to word study, and it's really focusing on knowledge of spelling patterns and word parts. So spelling, or the assessment use. So what is a spelling assessment assessing? Spelling assessments aim to gather information about a student's knowledge of basic letter-sound correspondence, sound-letter rules, and the knowledge of English orthography, which is a language's spelling structure or just internal structure. So assessment helps in determining the developmental stage, which a student is in as well, because spelling is developmental, and then it follows the kind of spelling tasks follow a progression. So assessments can help determine what stage a child is in of spelling development, and then it can pinpoint where are they kind of in the spelling progression of skills. So how are spelling assessments used? One form of spelling assessment is dictation, which is a pretty common spelling test. Students are read a list of dictated words and are asked to write them. So one type of dictation test is a standardized test. This is focusing on spelling the whole word correctly, and really students just receive a sum score or a grade level equivalency or a percentile rank. So this would kind of be like a basal spelling test of high frequency words, things of that nature. Another type of dictation style test where students are just read a word and they're asked to write it is a word inventory. However, the words on a word inventory include specific orthographic features. So they might have CVCE words, words with long vowel teams, digraphs, diphthongs. They might ask students to attend to prefixes and affixes. So word inventories are then analyzed for the correct use of orthographic features. So an example of this one that's pretty commonly used in the classroom is the Words Their Way spelling inventory. You're really looking at the spelling patterns that students can apply to written words. So then there's three types of spelling assessments. The ones that I previously mentioned were dictation assessments, and two of those styles include the standardized test and the word inventory. And then two other styles of spelling assessment that I have not administered or even seen administered yet are connected writing. So this studies the use of spelling features in functional writing. One research article was explaining that this task might be reading a student just a narrated story, and the students are asked to describe the story as the teacher is reading it, and then there's specific words that the scorer would look for to be spelled correctly to see if they can do it in any type of functional writing, whereas a dictation style assessment is just spelling a word in isolation. So then another style of spelling assessment is a recognition task. So this is where students would identify the correct spelling of a word when it's placed among a series of incorrect spellings of the word as well. I've only seen and ever administered myself a dictation style assessment. I have not done a connected writing or a recognition. So there's several components to a highly effective spelling assessment. Some research stated that ultimately what constitutes a high quality assessment depends on how far the assessment taps into the underlying theory of the spelling system and how spelling is acquired. So one thing that effective spelling assessment takes into consideration is the range and variety of orthographic features. So this means that it has a variety of spelling patterns. So it could assess letter sound rules. For example, when they, in a word read aloud, the students know that the t sound is represented by the letter T, and they write that down. And then they apply their knowledge to sound letter rules as bigger units. So this could be done by asking students to spell just regular words, but it also could be done by asking students to spell non-words. That includes letter sounds and rules. So I believe this is a task on the DIBELS assessment. So maybe you would ask them to spell nonsense words like vit or parn. So in the word parn, they would be looking for the R influenced vowel AR spelling pattern. So that would just test students' ability to apply a variety of spelling patterns within words that aren't in the typical English language. Another thing that is important to remember in a spelling assessment is that orthographic features may not be represented equally across all tests. For example, PALS only assesses a student's use of spelling patterns in single syllable words. So if they're spelling words, multisyllabic words, and trying to apply spelling patterns, but you've only given them a test that assesses their knowledge of spelling patterns in single syllable words, that might be a discrepancy. Effective spelling test also supports the developmental stages and progression of writing. So there's 3 developmental stages of writing. One is pre-communicative, where it's really students' writing is just drawings or letter-like formations. And then there's the pre-phonetic stage, where they begin to associate a letter sound to a letter symbol, more of a visual symbol. And then there's the phonetic stage, where students begin to attach the sound to a written symbol. And then within the phonetic stage, students follow a progression of spelling skills, usually beginning with just simple beginning and ending sounds, and then ending with morphological features such as Greek and Latin roots and prefixes and affixes. So then another component of the research that says, or that speaks to an effective spelling assessment is a student's readiness to spell words. So there's a few components to this. Some research stated that if students are ready to spell words, that they're able to read the words that they're being required to spell. And they've had opportunities to study the patterns and orthographic features. So I know when I introduce my students to we use Words Their Way for spelling or word study. When I introduce them to a new Words Their Way sort, they have the opportunity to study the words for a week and the spelling patterns that each word contains before they're asked to spell them. Another component to a student's readiness to spell words is knowing the meanings of words and being able to use them within sentences correctly. And then the last 2 components are actually kind of around mindset and attitude towards spelling. So students must have an attitude to want to spell words correctly and know why it's important to spell words correctly. And then they have to have the mindset to want to and know how to apply new spelling patterns to unknown words. So those are some things to consider that make a spelling assessment effective. So some strengths and weaknesses. A strength is the dictation style spelling assessments such as Words Their Way or PALS can be used to identify specific areas of spelling deficiencies or just underdeveloped skills, and then teachers can place students in a targeted intervention group. So I know this is how I score our PALS assessment, and then I match up kind of the skills that they need to work on based on their PALS assessment to a Words Their Way sort. And then we begin word study groups. And then some weaknesses to spelling assessments are that the dictation style assessments only assess writing in isolation. They don't always transfer to functional skills. And I know it's always a struggle for teachers when students can spell words in isolation, but when they're trying to transfer those skills to like actual writing or especially during my writing block, I don't see a lot of our word study skills transfer into my students' writing pieces. Some assessments may have differing or limited orthographic features, and standardized spelling tests such as assessments from a Basel textbook are one size fits all. It's pretty much just memorization of a word, and the scoring doesn't account for the orthographic features or students' knowledge or use of those. And then there are no state standards that adjust spelling expectations at each grade level. So there is the progression of skills, but it doesn't really, there's no standards that list kind of grade level specific skills that students must acquire. So I have an example of a second grade student's spelling assessment, and I'll zoom out just so I can use my mouse to point a little bit. So this is a second grader from my class, her PALS spelling assessment, and this is more of a word inventory style test. You're really just looking for the correct application of spelling patterns. So the spelling patterns that are featured on this test are beginning sounds, digraphs, blends, short vowels, nasal sounds, CVCE words, and long vowels. So if we're looking at the assessment, numbers 1 through 4 assess beginning and ending sounds, and they also assess short vowels. So in this student's assessment, she spelled fan and pet correctly, and then she correctly identified the beginning and ending sound of cup, but for dig, she tried to apply the silent E rule. So she did not receive a point for that one, for that word, but she did for the rest. And then for short vowels, she was pretty secure in her short vowel sounds up until she got to cup. She added the A in along with the U, so she did not receive a point for that word either. And then the middle column here is just a screenshot of what the online assessment looks like, and that's just the correct spellings of the words. And the green boxes mean that she applied that skill correctly, and the red boxes mean that that was a skill that was missed. And then the blue boxes block out anything that's not assessed in the word. So for example, in word number 5, it was chop. So even though she wrote chap, she still got the digraph correct. It was not assessing the op ending. So yeah, we could look through this more in depth, but I think I did kind of an overview on the side, and it really shows that after analyzing this, a starting point for her would be to work on blends. I always go by if they have less than, or if they have 3 or more correct words in each spelling pattern, that's one that they're probably pretty secure in. But if they have less than 3, that's the starting point. And kind of in the progression of spelling, blends would be her first target skill. And then we'd work our way to silent E patterns and long vowel patterns. So, and then one more slide. This is just a kind of a better idea, or a better printout of kind of where she's at with each skill. This is what the test, after I had input all of her scores, this is what the test laid out for me. So, so yeah, a pretty easy way to target what skills she needs to work on. So yeah, so and those are spelling assessments. And now I have to figure out how to unshare. Oh, here, stop share.
Nice. Thanks for sharing your PALS assessment.
Yeah, I don't know. Am I still sharing my screen? Stop share. Okay. There we go.
You're done sharing.
Yeah.
Any questions, anybody? Actually, I'll just mention something. In Clay's stuff, that she has a dictation that's actually of connected text. It's a sentence or two that they have to do. and that might be the connected text piece that kind of blends the two in a nice way. All right, let's keep going. Thank you, Hannah. And wait, and who is next? Oh, Alyssa, did I skip you by accident? Oh, okay. It was Hannah first and then you. Okay. Okay, good. I was remembering you were going to go second at one point, but I just didn't remember when.
Yeah. So I just click share, right? And that's it?
You have to push share, and then you have to say share what? Your entire screen, just pieces of it?
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Wow, this is weird. All right, here we go. Okay. Oh, I'm on the wrong slide. Okay. So and this is perfect right after Hannah's because it has a lot of the same things. So my assessment was the letters and sounds assessment. Oh, wow, but I can't read my whole, can I get rid of the people? Oh, there we go. Okay. My people were blocking my, okay, here we go. So letters, sounds, and letters names assessment, also known as alphabet knowledge. It's an assessment of a student's knowledge of letter names and letter sounds. It is used across grade levels, mostly in early childhood setting, to assess a student's knowledge on letter names and letter sounds. The assessment also can be performed until a student achieves perfect performance. There was an article that I put in my paper that mentioned perfect performance and how this is a constrained assessment because the student can eventually reach 100%. So obviously, if you have a first grader, a second grader, in a third grader, or however up that still needs work on letters and sounds, this would still be an assessment that you're using. This assessment is performed orally to, not to a teacher, by a teacher, instructor, specialist, or other school staff member. This assessment is to be performed one-on-one, not in a whole group or small group setting. This is just a screenshot of, actually in the PALS book, it was the directions on how to administer a letter and sounds assessment. It's pretty self-explanatory. What I think is interesting is that PALS says that you're supposed to give the students a sheet of the letters and they're supposed to use their finger to point to each letter and follow the letters. Personally, I don't do my letters and sounds assessment that way. I actually use flashcards for letters and sounds. The next slide has a part of the PALS assessment and then compared to my K-5 assessment. So this is actually the spring semester PALS assessment. I just did the fall, so it's written all over for all of my students. So I put the spring assessment on here. The benchmark means that that's the score that the students are expected to achieve. So in spring, they're expected to achieve 24 of these lowercase letters and 21 sounds. And as you notice, I think I talk about this a little more later on. For the letter sound knowledge, they actually test on capital letters, which I find interesting, and they include digraphs, and they actually take out 3 letters. I believe it's Q, X, and I can't think of the other one off the top of my head. The benchmark for this fall semester is 12 lowercase letter names and only 5 sounds. And I put our K-5 assessment next to it just to compare because we actually assess letter sounds on lowercase letters and PALS assesses on capital letters. We also add long vowel and short vowel sounds and ing endings on our sounds assessment. So the steps I use in my own classroom to assess letter names and letter sounds: one student is chosen and called to the testing area. I use my guided reading table. I usually do it during rotations where the rest of the class is occupied because it has to be one-on-one. I begin with assessing 26 capital letter names and record the data. I then move on to assess the 26 lowercase letter names and record that data as well. Our K-5 assessment for progress reports and quarterly reports only records lowercase letter sounds, but includes long and short vowels, digraphs, and the ing ending. And all of these assessments are performed for quarterly report cards as well as for the PALS assessment until the student reaches perfect scores. The research that I chose to include in my slides. One quote was from an article by Lynn Gordon. It said, teaching students the most frequent sounds of the alphabet letters is the first crucial step in good phonics instruction. The second quote I chose was 104 things to remember. This number is a product of 26 capital letter names, 26 lowercase letter names, 26 capital letter sounds, and 26 lowercase letter sounds or more, which I thought that was very interesting because when you think of letter names and letter sounds assessment, you think automatically, wow, it's so simple. They're just practicing their letters and sounds. But it's actually, with just those things included, it's 104 different things that you're assessing them on, which is a lot. This early learning is the beginning of a child's awareness of sound and one of the foundation blocks of communication. And the last one says that 26 letters of the alphabet fall into a category of literacy skill called constrained skills. That's what I talked about in the beginning of these slides. These are the skills that have a ceiling young children can do and achieve perfect performance. So the strengths and weaknesses of this assessment, the strengths are that you're able to track students' progress. The assessment of letter names and letter sounds and the ability for a student to master this skill is a great predictor of their success in reading. The responses students make can give insight into their learning. For example, if a student mixes B and D, or a common error that a lot of my students make is for the letter Y, they'll make the J sound because in Spanish, that's the sound that it makes. So it's very interesting to analyze the miscues that they make. Weaknesses, if an assessment is performed inaccurately, the data is not useful. If the testing environment is negative, the student does not perform to the best of their ability and confidence can be negatively impacted. If a student is very nervous about this assessment, especially because it is one-on-one, obviously they're not going to perform as accurately as they would have if they were comfortable and relaxed and it was just a one-on-one with their teacher and they felt like they could do the best job. It is common for a student to mix the letter name and the letter sound. Example, that actually happened today, I added this today, was we do a morning chit chat message, which I give them 2 minutes to turn and talk. And right now we're going through the whole alphabet. So it's a little rhyme and then it has the letter and I give them 2 minutes to talk with someone around them about, and to think of things that start with the letter U. And specifically today was letter U and it was so interesting because almost every answer that the students gave me actually started with Y because you sounds like Y. That was very interesting to me today. Research that's changed my thinking and teaching practices. The piece of research that challenged my thinking the most was the article by Lynn Gordon. She actually said 3 different things that blew my mind. I ran to my administrator when I read them and I shared them with her because she is the definition of early childhood, so I knew she would enjoy it. The first thing was the 104 things to remember, how we just think the letters and sounds assessment is so simple, but it's a lot of things to expect of them. Oh no. The next one was teach letter sounds, not letter names. So when I was student teaching, I was in K4, so we weren't doing CKLA, but I think somebody mentioned CKLA earlier. But it blew my mind, especially because they were saying that that's best practice. And what they suggested was if you're not going to always refer to letters by their sound instead of their name, to at least try to do that 90% of the time. And I actually tried doing that today. We were playing a beginning sound game. So I kept trying to say the letter A, the letter B, just to practice it. The one that I found the most interesting was when they said focus on lowercase letters and their sounds, not capital letters. There was a quote in that article that said, why are we stressing the uppercase letters or the capital letters so much when in a sentence, when they're reading, maybe only usually the beginning letter of a sentence is a capital letter. And unless there's like a name or something else like I in the sentence, most of the time every letter is lowercase. And I found, especially in kindergarten, that it's so common for our kids. Almost all of our K5s went to K4 at our school, which is incredible. But it's so common for them to come to K5 and in their writing, they're writing in all capital letters. And once I read this, I was like, oh my goodness, that's why. That's why they have such a hard time with lowercase letters. is because mostly when they do letter of the week, they concentrate on capital letters. So I just had to share those things because I just was completely mind blown that I hadn't thought of those things before. There's my citations. Okay, stop share. Okay, there we go.
Great. Yeah. Letter names are, it's one of those things that we all assume we know everything about. And then there's so much to know.
Yeah, the whole capital and lowercase thing, I was like, oh my goodness, we waste so much time when they're mostly only reading and writing lowercase letters.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And that YU thing, I mean, learning the letter names actually confuses.
Yeah, there's an example in my paper about how they see the T and they just think T. They don't actually think T. Or like today, all the kids were saying things like yolk and yellow, but it started with Y and not U. Very interesting.
It's very common. Yeah, and T puts a vowel on the end, and then they'll be like T H, you know.
Yep.
It really gets in the way. Yeah, it can. It really can. It doesn't always, but it really can.
Alyssa, do you use CKLA at your school?
No, we do not. So up until last year, we did Words Their Way. And this year, just K and 1 started the Lucy Calkins phonics that just came out this summer. So that's what we use. And second grade and up still uses Words Their Way.
We use CKLA at our school. And
how do you feel about it?
I personally love it.
Okay.
Third grade, it's a whole different ball game, but they do all nonfiction text with them, which is what I think is incredible. But yeah, the way they teach their phonics is like so backwards at first. I mean,
Yeah,
and that's what they do all the sounds. It's like so focused.
Yeah. And even this morning when we were playing that beginning sound game, I was like, oh, even if I totally went to only saying letter sounds, that doesn't account for everyone else that calls them by their letter name. So it would have to be fixed by literally the entire world for it to even matter. So, I mean, I'm going to try. Like, I've been saying, like, letter A, letter X. But it's still, yeah, wow. And my administrator actually was like, give me a copy of that article. And she took it with her to the K4 meeting because they do letter of the week.
Yeah, and just because you're doing it in one grade doesn't mean the next one's going to be on. And I have to say, I mean, I knew this research, and I think about the CKLA people who don't know the research, and they're you know, if it were me and I didn't know some of this, I would say, oh my gosh, they're doing it all backwards. I've got to fix this in my classroom. You know, and I'd be sneaking in stuff that I think is helping the kids, but I'd be undermining the whole thing. But I know when my kids go to a school where they focus on the sounds, they don't teach the letter names, and they focus on the sounds. And the kids would come home and I'd say, well, I said, what did you learn today? I learned, and I'd be like, what? What'd you learn? What? And then they'd write it. Oh, you learned a T. That's not a T, mommy.
It's a T. Well, or some letters, like, you can't say it loud. Like, right. I was like, you can yell, but like, and my whole class can't hear me. Letter H, you'd be able to hear me, but there's some sounds that you can't make louder.
It's true.
Yeah.
I like, because it's the only one you can feel.
And I'm like, and yeah.
Anyway, fun. Thank you very much, Alyssa. Who'd like to go next, or did I promise anybody? Anna, go ahead.
Okay. Can you see my screen? All right. Okay, my tool is comprehension questions. So we all know what comprehension questions are. We use them all the time. And comprehension questioning is the main tool to assess reading comprehension. Comprehension questions can be beneficial to get inside the brains of readers. so that we get some data. However, there are many issues that educators need to be wary of. Reading comprehension is a transactional process. It involves the reader, text, the activity, and socio-cultural context of what they are reading. And the reader interacts with the text to use all those tools that were just listed above. The background knowledge, that the purpose of the text, and their ability to read. So there are many uses of comprehension questions in various classrooms, reading intervention classrooms, reading classrooms, any content area classrooms. There are formal and informal uses. An example of formal would be an exam or a worksheet. Informal example would be discussions or a quick exit ticket. Written questions, answers to comprehension questions would be easier to assess, while verbal questions could be quicker and perhaps more informal. And aside from questioning, there are several comprehension connections with just comprehension. So decoding, fluency, and metacognition all relate to comprehension. All those parts of reading can affect how they understand the text. If they're not reading fluently, they're reading word by word, they can get caught up in that rather than comprehending what they're actually reading. And then another application would be the questioning before questions, reading and answering questions during reading, and post reading. So like I mentioned, there are strengths. It is very difficult to assess comprehension. So questioning can help teachers get some data. And it's important to understand what they understand. I'm sorry, I don't know what I just said. It's important for teachers to understand what the kids are understanding by asking these questions is one way to get the data. Another strength of comprehension questions would be to scaffold the active reading process. The strategies of monitoring, predicting, inferring, questioning, connecting, summarizing, visualizing. These are all skills that readers need to be strong, active readers, and comprehension questions can help strengthen those skills and keep them on track to do all those things, like to summarize or to visualize. Another strength is to scaffold metacognition. Metacognition is the awareness of one's own thinking and how they're thinking. And so a teacher asking questions can help the reader understand what they're thinking as they read it. So these are the strengths that I found. Now I have many weaknesses. I'll explain at the end my take on it. Comprehension is abstract, and like I said, it's difficult to assess, but it needs to be assessed. And the other essential components of reading, fluency, vocab, phonics, and phonemic awareness, are more concrete, whereas comprehension is more abstract. So there are weaknesses. The first one is interscore reliability. Reliability being answering comprehension questions that are open-ended require judgment on the scorers. And so if I scored something compared to my coworkers scoring it, we can get different results based on our judgment. So one example of this is in the QRI, as we said in our presentation last week, that there is a reliability issue with the score because it's subjective. It can't be subjective. Another weakness is that sometimes comprehension questions are not using the correct format. I found a study that showed that, and that's kind of obvious that multiple choice questions will give the students will score higher on those types of tests or assessments because they're given prompts and options. And so a student can just use the process of elimination to get rid of the ones that they know are not right. And is that really scoring what they know? Not exactly. So an example of that is in the MAPS test when, well, that's the assessment that we do for our students. And there's the long passages for the reading test and 4 multiple choice answers for each question. So it's not a great format to assess their true comprehension. Next, something this could relate to Lydia's presentation about retelling that, well, I'm just thinking of the QRI again. Right after they read the passage, they're asked to retell what they remember, and right away, they're not allowed to look back. And I thought this was weird. I mean, they do have an opportunity to look back later, but not allowing look backs, I don't think is a true assessment of comprehension. It's more memorization. What do you remember? And it's a lifelong practical skill that people do all the time. If I don't remember something I read, I'm going to look back and find it. I don't think that means I'm a bad reader. I wrote in my paper about my personal experience with reading the Odyssey, and I just remember in 9th grade that there was assessments on, like, what do you remember? Name the characters and what happened first, what happened next, and it was all just rote memorization. And I don't remember that. It was a really complicated book, so I wasn't allowed to use my book, but if I was, I would have done better. And that brings me to my last point, is that there are better, higher cognitive processes available than comprehension. And this is where Bloom's taxonomy comes in. The processes of recalling and remembering factual information is it's using less cognitive abilities than the higher level questions on the Bloom's taxonomy, such as apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So that brings me back to my Odyssey experience in high school, and so many of my assessments in my schooling were just, what do you remember? Tell me this. What happened here? So I think my comprehension and kids' comprehension now can be much better assessed by analyzing, applying, creating something, and using those higher cognitive skills and those skills that Ash discussed in his presentation as well. So asking the right kinds of questions is how we can challenge readers in the right way. So even though there are a lot of weaknesses, don't forget the benefits. Comprehension questions are essential for us to get in the brains of students. And a reader can use comprehension strategies to reflect on their own prior knowledge. And if they're answering questions while reading, they can monitor their own reading. They can think about their thinking, metacognition, and they can become skilled readers. But there are issues, mostly reliability and lower level questioning. So in conclusion, teachers need to be wary of these weaknesses and use comprehension questions in the correct way so that they can obtain accurate assessments of readers' comprehension.
Any questions? It does connect really nicely with some of the others. Absolutely. Yeah, comprehension questions are the go-to thing, but they are problematic. They're not a straight representation of what students understand, for sure. Gosh, when you mentioned the Odyssey, it's one of my favorite books of all time, and I'm thinking of all the different kinds of things you could do with it that wouldn't be just put it in order, you know? Gosh.
Yeah, and it's so confusing that I don't remember it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, there's so much good stuff. Oh, wow. Thank you very much, Anna. And who would like to go next? Oh, Tamika, I think you edged out Beth. Quicker on the hand. Whoop. And while she's, oh, we can't hear you. You're on mute. I'll unmute. I'll try to unmute you. It's not letting me. Let me try one other thing. Because sometimes All right. Here, I'm going to unmute you. No, it's still not going to let me. All right.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, now I lost it. Where is it? I'm looking for it. Sorry, guys.
No problem. While she's doing that, I'll just remind you guys, you should be kind of looking for assessment tools that you can use with your student to expand your, because you're looking for 3 optional assessments. Just a reminder that that's part of this listening task for today.
Okay, I think I found it.
Great.
All right. So the the assessment tool that I did research on is Concepts About Print. Is this on the full screen for you all?
It's not full screen. It's not, you haven't done the slideshow yet.
Okay.
If that's what you mean.
Notice the chimes. Okay. So Marie Clay was the pioneer who emphasized the importance of concepts about print. She began her research with students in New Zealand, where she developed an assessment tool to evaluate their level of print awareness. The concepts about print are intended to help teachers, originally, this is what she designed it for, to identify differences, to assess students' preparedness for particular instruction, to aid in planning future instruction, to record student progress for the year, and mainly to know what students are correctly or incorrectly attending to, and what kind of help they may need to understand the written code. The CAP encompasses print awareness, which is the umbrella for word awareness, graphic awareness, and metalinguistic. Print awareness is knowledge about print and when young children learn why people read, what people do when they read. Word awareness is knowing that words are different than letters and that letters make up words. Graphic awareness is knowing the distinctive features of letters and the knowledge of letter names. Metalinguistic awareness is having the ability to consciously reflect upon and manipulate elements of written language. And I still have yet to totally understand that one, so. The CAP or the CAP assesses if the child can recognize, in general, the front of the book, that print tells the story, that letters make up words, and that there are letters, that there's a first and last letter in, that there are first letters and last letters in words, that you can use upper and lowercase letters, that there are spaces for a reason, and let me see if I can see the last one. That different punctuation marks signal different meanings, like the question mark, period. Print awareness. Print awareness is important for learning how to read and write. Pictures are an important stage in early literacy, but print is how children become aware that the words tell the story. CAP awareness is when the child knows how print is used and functioning for reading books. Concept of print activity should help students understand the mechanics and characteristics of text. Oops, I didn't try to do that, but okay. I'm trying to move my picture out of the way so that I can read, so that's why I keep hitting the chime.
If you just kind of click and drag us, we can.
Yeah. Okay. So still in my way a little bit, but concept of print activity should help students understand the mechanics and characteristics of text. So by saying mechanics, that means how a book is used, how to turn the page from left to right, the title of the book, the back of the book, and things like that. The assessment process, CAP can be assessed one-to-one. The teacher will read the story and ask the student questions or ask the student to perform different tasks to find out what their level of CAP is. The student will get 1 point for each question answered. The assessment has 24 questions with 24 potential points. The questions for the teacher is scripted, so it takes some practice to get accuracy with the testing. There's a scoring guide to determine if the student's answers are correct or not. They can be compared to a mean score, a Stay9 score of the average child for their age. The student may be below average or above the average student. So something that really came to my understanding after doing the research is how much environmental print is like a preliminary stage for learning about letters and learning that letters have meaning. Children typically read print from the environment before they read print from a book. Just like when you might notice how, even in my memory, everybody knows what the big golden capital M means. And when I would pass by it, we would just pass by it. So, which is McDonald's. And children recognize that print right away. They might recognize their favorite cartoon characters. I know my son, he was able to read Sonic and knew the word Sonic. That was one of his first words that he learned, besides mom and dad, but to read. So, because that's one of his favorite videos and favorite cartoons. Environmental print can be used in the classroom as a home and school connection. And children go through stages in recognizing environmental print. they depend on the context. Then they may use visual cues, and then they'll have the letter and sound connection. A literacy enriched activities at home that can be done for children are things that we commonly do. I know I like to cook with my kids, which I think involves science, measuring, math, calculation, reading. So helping to cook and read recipes, creating a grocery list, writing a letter to Santa. Some people celebrate Christmas. Storybook reading, it was a strong emphasis in the research. And they can also go with their parents to different things like the library, grocery store, and the post office. And those things can become, instead of them just accompanying the parent, they can become more interactive and involved in the process, if you have the time. So storybook reading, I know we are pretty much aware of the big emphasis and how much it can impact a child's awareness of print and help with them learning to read. Allowing children to ask questions about what's being read and answering them with enthusiasm, which is where they, the interaction between the parent and child or teacher and child is where the most instruction can come from. And the child can really develop an excitement for learning to read and want to explore it more. So the research I read put a big emphasis on the interaction between the adult and the child and the teacher and the child, and how if you allow them to ask questions about the storybook, you give them answers, you engage them more and interact with them more, then they'll get more out of the experience and develop better reading habits. And these are some other examples of what storybooks do for literacy. So hearing adult role models, hearing adults model reading, reading, being read to a lot, storytelling with guided instructions, and children who are read to on a daily basis by their parents tend to be more interested in learning. So this is ways that teachers can encourage a literacy-enriched classroom, some things that we already see in early childhood development. One aspect that I really like is the word wall, because you can use words that are sight words, commonly used words, which are sight words, and words that the children relate to. They can help to come up with their names. So it's real relatable, and it's something that's continuing to develop over the course of the school year. Another recent thing that's used for literacy enrichment is technology. And I work at a place where they use the interactive whiteboards, and they use them very well. The kids engage in them, and they learn so much from interacting with them. Of course, they only use them for a set period of time, but there's an immense amount of information that they can attain at the click of a button. So it's really good for them. So another part of my research that stood out was low-income families and the discrepancy between the children and their CAP level of awareness. There are some stats that say that low-income families children come into the early childhood program, or K-5, with about 200 hours of reading, whereas middle-income students come in with about 1,000 to 1,700 hours of reading. So for that discrepancy, if there is one, there should be some intervention involved with low-income families. Early literacy screening should be done for individuals who serve low-income families to identify children who may need early literacy intervention. Again, I'll just read the quote. Children lacking opportunities to interact with print in their homes rely on pre-kindergarten environments away from home for early literacy experiences, while children coming from literacy supportive backgrounds need continued exposure with an abundance of print in pre-kindergarten environments away from home. Again, this is based on statistics. Of course, each person or each child that comes from a low-income family may have a different background or support system. So And I also learned some things about bilingual students. In some cases, bilingual children have been known to have some advantages and strengths with their level of print awareness. They have more of an ability to ignore misleading information that will prevent the use of any problem-solving skills. Ways to support EEL students or students who are learning English is to label the classroom objects in the home language of the student. Provide non-English materials whenever possible to help support the child's first language. And the family should also be encouraged to speak to their children in their native language.
Tamika, I'm just gonna say, oh, you're coming to the end, but I was like,
Yes,
I think all of us are gonna have to kind of hurry here at the end.
Oh, okay, I know I have like too many, but
No,
okay.
that's okay, but here we go.
Strengths and weaknesses. It's research. CAP, the concept of print tool, is has research-driven data that supports it. It can be used as a diagnostic tool to screen preschool students or students who are entering kindergarten. To focus on specific concepts to teach from the assessment. It can target specific delays or missing information. The concepts being assessed are practical and reasonable, so they're easy to understand if the child recognizes what's being assessed or not. All right. It can be used as a standalone assessment informally or accompanied with other assessment tools formally. Weaknesses has to be done one-on-one instead of a whole group. You have to practice to know the script to be able to administer it with accuracy. A student who is new to school may not perform well if they're shy or not comfortable. It's not a standalone test to indicate if a student will become a proficient reader. Sorry if I was wordy.
No. I think we've taken a lot, and we're just getting to the end, and I'm starting to realize, oh my gosh, we got a time crunch. I didn't mean to interrupt. It wasn't you.
That's okay.
These are just interesting, and I know people are, there's so much to get, but I won't take time talking about this. Any questions for Tamika? All righty. Now, Beth, I think you were next. Take it away. You're sharing your screen.
Okay. All right, let's see. Okay, so phonemic awareness assessments. This is near and dear to my heart as an Orton Gillingham tutor. Phonemic awareness is under the umbrella of phonological awareness, and it refers specifically to the ability to manipulate sounds in words at the level of the individual component sounds. And this is an extremely complex task for children to learn, but most children do learn it during their preschool years. It's complicated because they have to stop focusing on the meaning of words and focus instead on the form of words and those individual sounds. And those sounds are really artificial. Syllables are real. Onset and rhyme, those are real, those are distinct, but phonemes are co-articulated. So we kind of pretend we can break a word into them, but they are always influenced by all of the phonemes that surround them. So if you just try right now, say the word cat, and then say the word cot, and pay attention to how your mouth forms that letter C. It's very different with the A following it versus the O following it. So this is a really difficult task that children are able to master at a young age. Phonemic awareness, the good thing about this topic for me and the bad thing about it was that there is a ton of research on it. We know a lot about phonemic awareness. It is the key to being able to read, and it is a very reliable predictor of who is going to be able to read and who is going to struggle with reading. There there are 5 factors that they can identify in kindergarten students that can predict with tremendous accuracy who is going to have a reading disability by 2nd grade. And of those factors, phonemic awareness is one of the only ones that we as teachers can actually impact. The other factors tend to be things like the student's socioeconomic status, the education level of the parents. But phonemic awareness, we can do something about when that skill is missing. There are a number of tests of phonemic awareness, which makes it a little bit complicated trying to figure out what direction to go if you're trying to evaluate it. Phonemic awareness testing is recommended at least mid-year for all kindergarten students and in the fall for all 1st grade students. So lots of us are already doing these assessments right now with our students. But it is something that you can also use with students who you feel maybe are missing something, you're not sure what's going on with them. You can do this one-on-one at any point with a student. Because they fall under that larger umbrella of phonological awareness, there aren't a huge number of tests that are specific to phonemic awareness. There is, the DIBELS has a phoneme segmentation test, and there's the Yapsinger test of phoneme segmentation. Most of the time when we're assessing phonemic awareness, we are doing it as part of a larger battery of phonological awareness assessments, which is actually good because there is also a lot of research about the hierarchy of how those skills are learned, and it can be really useful to see where their phonemic awareness skills are in the context of their larger skill set, so we can tell more specifically where we need to do our work with students. This is just a chart that shows some of the common phonological and phonemic awareness assessments and the grade levels where they're done, and also sort of the tests that are used. So the DIBELS, that phoneme segmentation test, there's also a DIBELS initial sound test that's used in kindergarten. PALS, the pre-K, and also the PALS-K version have assessments that are subsets of those larger tests. If we want to go with slightly older children, the phonological awareness test can be used on students between 5 and 9 years old. And then the test of preschool early literacy, the test of phonological awareness, and then the Yapsinger test of phoneme segmentation. I have said that phrase more often this week, but these are some examples of some of the types of questions that we're asking on phonological or phoneme awareness task assessments. Rhyming recognition, giving students a couple of words and asking if they rhyme or not. Rhyming production, I give you a word, you tell me a word that rhymes with it. Word awareness, if I give you a phrase or you know, how many words do you hear in it? So for example, happy birthday, they have to identify that birthday is one word and not 2 words. Syllable awareness, having kids tap out or count out syllables. That one was really interesting to me, that there is almost no instruction needed to teach children how to break words into syllables. It seems to be a very natural thing that they learn on their own. When we get down to these bottom ones, these are the ones that are more specifically focused on the phoneme awareness. So initial sounds, final sounds, breaking words into those component sounds, blending the sounds. I'll give you the phonemes and you tell me what word I meant. Seeing if they can hear that sound in the middle of a word, and then deleting a phoneme. So I'm going to give you a word and then you're going to say it, but not all of it. This is just a screenshot of the DIBELS phoneme segmentation test. So you would tell the child the word and you would listen for them to give you the correct segments. Another one that's been studied a lot, the Rosner test of auditory analysis skills, also called the phoneme deletion test. This is that one here. I'm going to say to you, cowboy, you say it, but don't say boy. And then the Yapsinger test of phoneme segmentation. And I'm going to change my screen for a minute because I did this at the last minute, so I didn't have time to put it in my slideshow, but I did, let's see if you can see this. I actually gave the Opsinger test of phoneme segmentation to my tutoring students yesterday and did a video of that. So I'm going to play that for you. This is my little peanut, Avery, and she is 7.
Today, one of the things we're going to do is a word game. Okay? So I'm going to say a word, and then you are going to break the word apart. So you're going to tell me all the sounds in the word in order. So for example, if I said old, then you would say old. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to practice a couple just to be sure.
We did the opposite last time. You said dog and we said and I said dog.
And then you put it together. Yeah, so we're doing the opposite this time. So, okay, so this is the practice one, okay? Ride.
Go.
Very good. How about go?
Go.
Very good. How about man?
Mm-hmm.
Well done. All right. Let's see. How about dog?
Go.
Very good. Keep.
Keep.
Whoops.
Eat.
How about time? How about no?
Oh.
Shoes. Very good. Wave.
What? A.
Rude.
I'll stop it right there. I pulled up just a picture of the score sheet so you can see the word she just said was grew, but she did that one incorrectly. She didn't get all of the sounds. She did the g and then ru she put all together. So that's how it's noted on the score sheet then. Overall, she did very well with that. Let's go back to this. All right. Well, in terms of what makes a good assessment of phonemic awareness, how do we know that we're measuring what we think we're measuring? There has been a lot of research into the cognitive demands that are placed on children in these type of assessments that are maybe showing up rather than their actual ability to understand phonemes. So if you think back to that list of tasks that they were given, think about all the things we're asking very little kids to do. They have to pay attention to a word and not pay attention to what it means. They have to be able to hold words in their memory and then move pieces of them around. They have to overcome cognitive inhibition. If I say to you, okay, say cowboy, but don't say boy, that's pretty easy. But if you're 4 years old, that's not so easy to do. Sometimes we require a vocal and a motor response at the same time. So we're going to segment this word, and we're going to break it into syllables, and you're going to clap out the syllables. We might be measuring their ability to break it into syllables. We might also be measuring their ability to clap in time to something. Some tests give a picture to help the kids remember a word, but there's a lot of work involved in just identifying the picture and remembering it correctly, so that if you're matching things that have the same starting sounds, is that a picture of a bear or was it a cub? You know, we're talking about how many syllables things have. Is that a cat or is it a kitty? So just using the pictures, while it is a help sometimes with working memory, can also be a difficulty. Just having kids remember the terminology when we say things like, okay, how many syllables do you hear? That's a complex word for them. That's not a word they use every day. So that can be an issue. And then sometimes it's confusing to them because we have them do the same task but with different units. So first you're going to break this word into syllables, and now you're going to break it into phonemes, and changing the task like that can be complicating. Hallie Yap, though, has done a lot of studies on phonemic awareness assessments and how valid they are and how good they are at predicting. She was concerned with some of those issues that we might not be measuring what we think we're measuring. And so she examined 10 different types of phonemic awareness assessments. And then that Yap Singer test was one that she developed in particular for the study that she was doing. So there were all different tasks, rhyming, auditory discrimination, phoneme blending, word-to-word matching, sound isolation, phoneme counting, phoneme segmentation, and phoneme deletion. And she found that with the exception of those word matching tasks, some were better than others, but all of them were at least moderately reliable. So they all work for our purposes in a classroom. She also did some research and broke them down further into single factor assessments and compound factor assessments. So a single factor assessment requires a child to perform one operation and give a response. So the Yapsinger test of phoneme segmentation is an example of a single factor assessment, and that's the one that has the greatest predictive validity. But then there are compound factor assessments. So sometimes we're asking a child to perform an operation, then hold a word in their memory and do a second operation. That involves a lot more, there's a heavier cognitive load with something like that. She found on that test, the Rosner test of phoneme deletion had the greatest predictive validity. But if you did both of those tests together, the Yapsinger and the Rosner test, that is the best way to get an accurate prediction of a child who's going to have reading issues. And the other thing that was interesting about this research is that in finding that there was, it was helpful to have these compound factor assessments, what she demonstrated was that not only is it not necessarily terribly concerning that we're asking them to do all of these other things while they're doing it, but that those things are probably essential, that that's a piece of this ability to learn to decode. So it's okay to be giving tasks that are measuring, maybe something more than just their phonemic awareness. Strengths and weaknesses. This was a hard section for me to write because there are so many strengths to this. There is such a very strong, well-established research base. We absolutely know what we're looking for here. We know how to fix it. When we assess this, if we find a child who has a weakness, we can give very targeted instruction to remediate this. And the remediation works. With all the testing that they've done, they have found that there's a measurable improvement in reading ability, and then that improvement, that improvement is maintained over time. And it provides an opportunity to prevent reading failure and also to remediate students who have already had struggles with reading. I've said several times that most students are going to learn phonemic awareness on their own, but the research also tells us that 20% of students will not learn it without additional instruction. And this gives us the opportunity to find those kids while they're still 4 and 5 years old and prevent the struggle that they might face otherwise. Weaknesses. These are individually done tests, and so there's a lot of time involved in giving the test, especially if you think about you have to do this with your entire class, and you need to do progress monitoring, so you're repeating some of this. It's important to have people who are trained to do this so that they are accurately assessing kids. There are so many tests available. That's a positive and a negative. It can be hard to find a test that is going to suit your purpose. And just the amount of testing involved in the training can be a financial burden on school districts. I would say that is probably offset by relieving the burden of having to work with kids who are struggling. So overall, I think that this is a very useful tool that we can all use.
Great. Thank you. Very useful. Yeah, I think of teachers trying to get a kid to blend cat and going ka, a, ta, and then they get ka-ta from back, right? You've got to know how to give these tests. Thank you, Beth. And who is next? Oh, I remember, Danielle, because you were going last because you're going to kind of connect some of these together. Great. Take it away. I know we're going over, guys. So if you need to go, I'm recording this right now. I apologize. I should have been doing this all along. But anyway, go ahead, Danielle.
All right. Desktop. you guys. My topic is listening comprehension assessment. And the importance of listening comprehension assessments are that it's a big part of reading comprehension development along with decoding. So decoding and listening comprehension kind of go together, and they help as a big part of reading comprehension, which is why
Danielle, you're kind of quiet. I don't know if there's a way to turn up your sound or something.
Hold on. Is that better?
Not really. Oddly enough. I mean, we can hear you, but it's just quiet. You can keep going.
Can you hear me now?
Really well. Good.
Okay, good. I switched to my computer. Okay, so as I was saying, listening comprehension is a big part of reading comprehension development, along with decoding, which is why many lower grades focus on this aspect. And the biggest part I think of it is that listening is a life skill. So it's just one of those things that should be touched upon. What is a listening comprehension assessment? It is basically what it sounds like. The student listens to either you read a passage or they listen to a recorded passage, and then they answer questions. So the passage is usually at instructional level. And again, you would start at like their frustration level, and you can use QRI passages, any of the IRIs. But many students can comprehend, they can listen to a listening comprehension assessment at a higher level than what they can actually do for a reading comprehension assessment. So you will tend to have to use higher levels. The questions can be printed for them, so they can be in front of them, but usually you don't put the passage right in front of them. And responses can be written or verbal, and you can use retelling in part of this, but it's not always the best thing to do. So what it's used for is it gives the comprehension level of a student after listening to a passage. So they can, tell you certain things like specific points of the plot or smaller details that you might ask of them. And can they understand more complex vocabulary that is being used in the passage? It takes away decoding issues that the student might have. So in reading comprehension, students have, if they have any sort of reading difficulties, you're going to be able to see that. And then it takes away from perhaps their comprehension of the whole passage, while having them listen to the passage instead helps them to be able to focus on the actual words and what the passage is saying, and therefore they should be able to comprehend a little bit easier. The listening comprehension assessment is said to show the student's real reading potential, so how high a student can potentially read and how good of a reader. And there's a big emphasis on students with dyslexia and those who speak other languages. And I think I've seen a huge spike of interest in this in my district, at least, because it is part of the Common Core standards. There's a listening and speaking section of it now, and it is a section of the Forward exam. So we do tend to prep our students a little bit more now for that nonfiction listening comprehension assessment that is on there. Whereas before, we didn't even think about doing that in middle school, I feel like. Strengths, it's essential to get a true comprehension score from a student who has reading difficulties. It can be done as a whole group or individually. It's usually quick and effective, and it takes away students who fake it until they make it. So I know I was one of those students where if I had the questions in the passage in front of me, I would just read the questions and then look in the passage for those answers. I wouldn't read the whole passage. Weaknesses is that the passage topic still does matter. It has to be something that the student is at least a little familiar with. It can be hard to decipher what a student understands when using the retelling portion, so that's why you tend to stick with the question and answers. And how you read it to the child can influence how they do. If you have any mispronunciations, if there's pauses, if you put stress on certain specific words. And kind of like how Anna mentioned before, it is subjective in the way that you see if a student is actually comprehending the information or not. Yes, you have the questions where they, poorly made questions. So it depends on the person for that. So this is kind of one of the examples. I'm not going to completely go through it, but this is from an actual textbook that I found, that I had at school. So basically they just went through and you can check yes or no for the student and you end up giving them a score at the end. If they can usually answer 75% of your questions with success, they pass that one and you would go on to another passage. So the research behind the listening comprehension assessments is largely you will find dyslexia and students who are learning English as a second language. That anytime I typed in listening comprehension assessments, those were the only two things that came up most of the time. So I don't have much experience in those areas. So I was kind of like, oh, all right. And also people wanting to sell their listening comprehension assessments. That was another thing if you do a Google search of it. So the same cannot be said for obviously reading comprehension assessments. There's many resources available and you have a variety of different assessments that I feel like you can use. So like I said, I have a student, Jesse, who has dyslexia, and I have just found so much that I will let him try to read the passage, but when he gets to that frustration level, that's when I take over, and he does such a good job. I can tell he comprehends everything that I say and everything that I read, and it really is just that reading struggle that he has. So it's crazy to see the difference. ELL, I don't know if they're still referring to them as English language learners. I feel like it changes all the time, but it's the same thing. They're learning a new language, and if they are listening and if they know the actual vocabulary, that's part of it. That's a big part of it. Then it's truly measuring their comprehension level on the topic. Implications for real life. This is where I just feel like students don't realize that listening is a life skill. They do it beyond school. They will do it in their jobs and everything like that. So the fact that, the comprehension assessment, I feel like we need to teach more strategies for it, I guess. And that was something that I wasn't finding too much research on. This is kind of an interesting one, but the future of listening assessments is, since technology seems to be the future of education and many careers, they're starting to explore using listening comprehension assessments that include a picture or video that goes along with it. I have no idea how they would, even score that or even start, but I just thought that was really interesting that I stumbled upon that. And I feel like it's a completely different topic, but interesting. So what's the big difference? Listening comprehension assessments take many reading issues out of the equation. If a student struggles with decoding, they'll suffer with the passage's meaning and parts. Listening takes away those struggles and focuses on the parts of the passage, and if the student can understand the words and what the passage is trying to portray. And that is the end, I hope. Sorry, I think I talked really fast.
It was really good stuff, though. A really good one. And
I felt like a fish out of water with it. So it was,
you didn't pick something you were strong in. You picked something you wanted to learn about.
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. And I will make this quick, and because I know I am over time now. So thank you, everybody. Here it is. The homework. Basically, please post your wonderful presentations here at the assessment tool presentation, so we can all look at each other's, and if you would like to pluck something, go ahead, and of course you can contact the presenter as well to get more details if you need that. Also, please watch Natalie's assessment tool. She sent a video of it, and I figure we can all just watch that 10 minutes on our own. You know, it doesn't seem to go very well through my internet. So that's a good place for it. Also, just a heads up, try to finish assessing before next week, because we're going to be doing an assessment workshop and kind of going through the assessments. It's not a drop dead deadline. I'm not going to be collecting them, but it will just be helpful if you have the assessments so that you can ask questions and get some help on your assessments. And then next week we will be talking about lessons, and we're going to start with something called roaming the known lessons. So we're going to be reading about that, and I give a little blurb here about what it is, but get what, you know, this is going to be the background knowledge. Well, actually, I should say you're jumping off knowledge for next week. So we'll go over again. It's hard to get your head around roaming the known. It's kind of a different way of conceptualizing lesson planning.
I don't know if it's just me, but I just went to the homework page and the link for roaming the known doesn't work for me. I don't know if it's just me, but
Okay.
I just checked, so you might want to look at that.
Perfect. Thank you for letting me know, and I will double check that. All righty. And so that's all I have for you guys. I'll bring back e-portfolios next time. You've got until Thanksgiving to do those, and it won't take that much time. So I think we're good on that. So thank you all for your patience. And I'll hang out if any of you need me. So thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Maybe I should have already known this, but where do I put my paper? In the same presentation link?
Okay. Yes, in the wait. There are actually two different places. So your presentation goes here. Your paper actually goes up. You see, well, you could just go to assignments. This is probably the fastest way to get there. And find it. Oh boy, there's a lot of brouhaha I've got here. Okay, here it is. Assessment tool and presentation. You'll click here and it'll take you, oh, this is not the student view, but it'll take you to where you put it.
Okay.
So assignments are all listed in there. It's also in last week's stuff, I think, or was it this week's? But yeah, it's in one of them. Let's see. Oh, right here. You could just go to Class 6, today's class, and click here and turn it in that way as well. Again, this is not the student view. I can't remember how to make it a student view. So, but if you click either place, you can turn in your paper. Thanks for asking that one.
Quick question about the assessments.
Yeah.
I've done 2 assessments and I'm going to do another one tomorrow with my student.
Yeah.
Is there a number that we need or just enough information to,
well, you need to do your battery. So, I can't remember which battery. Are you QRI?
QRI, yeah.
So you'll have to do a full QRI, finding their level, basically going up until the student frustrates. And so having a frustration, and you have to have a running record in there as well on the passages. And then in addition, you're supposed to have 3 extra assessment tools. So ones that you haven't given in your battery. Excuse me. So, among these things or anything else we've mentioned or read about is fine.
Okay. And when you say full battery, does that mean, so like if my student's a 2nd grade level, does that mean give them all the assessments in the 2nd grade level?
No,
like
no,
that's where he was. Okay.
No, I'm sorry. What I mean, like you have to do the sight word task,
right. Then
you have to do the battery, the full, concept,
yeah.
And I leave it sort of up to you. It's a good idea to do like a fiction and a nonfiction, just to get a sense of that as well. But or if you have a much higher student, you might want a silent reading one as well.
Okay, thanks.
I guess I have a question kind of on that too. So if I'm doing PALS, I mean, PALS kind of encompasses a whole lot of stuff.
A whole lot of stuff.
To come up with like 3 more additional assessments, like, because to do PALS and then a running record, I suppose the only other thing I could do is like a comprehension or retell based off a level that
Yes.
she's reading.
Yeah, that would be very appropriate. Absolutely, those would work. You could also do an interest evaluation. Why don't I put an interest up? Those are, we didn't have anybody talk about motivation today. I mean, and really study it. And we've got these, the classic Garfield, how do you feel about reading kind of stuff might be.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Hi.